Well, I just recorded an entire video and I forgot to turn my mic on, so here we go again. Genesis chapter 43 is the topic for today. I'm gonna get double study in. Maybe it'll be better the second time around. But anyway, Genesis chapter 43, we're trying to cover one chapter of the Bible every day, and today's Genesis 43. So if you want the free PDF that contains all of this information that you're about to see up on the screen right now, you can download it for free on our website, thanks to the patrons and the people who support this channel. When did the events of Genesis chapter 43 take place? Well, we know that Joseph was 17 years old when he was sold as a slave into Egypt. That would have been approximately 1728 BC. He was 30 years old when he became the second most powerful man in Egypt. That would have been 1715 BC. We know that this was at least 7 years after he rose to power in Egypt, because Pharaoh had had a dream back in chapter 41 about 7 years of abundance. Those 7 years had passed, and now they had moved into the second part of what Pharaoh's dream predicted, 7 years of famine. Our primary character in this chapter is Joseph. Once again, he's the governor of Egypt. He's a very, very powerful man. He was the son of Jacob and Rachel. We've then got Joseph's 12 brothers. Joseph's 10 brothers. They were the ones who had sold Joseph into slavery 20 plus years before this. And they had come to Egypt and met Joseph, although they weren't aware of it, back in chapter 42. Now they've got to come back to Egypt to buy more food in chapter 43. We also are going to talk about Benjamin. This was Joseph's 11th and youngest brother. He was the only other brother of Jacob and Rachel. There was Joseph and Benjamin. They were both sons of Rachel. And then finally, Jacob. He was the son of Isaac. He was the father of these 12 boys that we've been talking about for quite a while now. And I think that's all I have to say on him. Where did these events take place? Well, grab your map and get ready to reference. Jacob lived in Canaan, up there by the Dead Sea. We've been talking about that area for quite a while now. Now, he had to send his 10 boys, or in this chapter, his 11 boys, down to Egypt, which was southwest of him, to buy food. I think I've broken this chapter down into two big sections. The first one is verses 1 through 14. Jacob relents and allows Benjamin to go to Egypt. So you remember where we left off in the last chapter. The brothers had returned from Egypt. They had had a terrible experience there. They had been in custody for 3 days. Joseph, down in Egypt, was holding Simeon in prison until they returned with Benjamin, their brother. But Jacob, remember his response at the end of the last chapter, he said, "No, I am not allowing you to take Benjamin because I don't want anything to happen to him." Well, the famine was pretty bad in Canaan, and when you don't have anything to eat, sometimes that can change your mind. And Jacob and his sons were running out of food. So Jacob told his sons, go back down to Egypt, buy more food. His sons told him, no, we cannot do that. We cannot go unless Benjamin goes with us, because the governor, who was Joseph, had told them that they would not see his face, they would not get any more food until Benjamin came down with them. Benjamin was the proof that they weren't spies. Judah told his father that he would be responsible for Benjamin, and if anything happened to Benjamin, he would bear the guilt. So Jacob finally agreed to let Benjamin go, and he told his sons to take this governor of Egypt a present. And the present consisted of fruit and balm and honey, gum, myrrh, pistachio nuts, and almonds. Now that would have been a pretty extravagant gift during the time of a famine. He also told them to take double the money, so that they could pay for the money that they had found in their sacks at the end of the last chapter. That way they would also show that they were honest men. So then section number 2, verses 15 through 34, Joseph's brothers are invited into his home. So the brothers traveled down to Egypt. They appeared before Joseph, and when Joseph saw that Benjamin was with them, he had his steward invite them into his home. Now, they took this as a bad thing. They were afraid that Joseph was going to take them and to make them servants, or basically slaves, in Egypt. So they went up to the steward of Joseph's house, and they started to explain to him what happened on the last trip. They had found their money in their bags. They didn't know how it got there, but they had brought the money back so they could pay double this time around. The steward of Joseph's house told them not to worry, though. It was not a problem. He knew about the money, and it was not a concern. He brought them into Joseph's house, washed their feet, gave them water to drink, and he cared for their donkeys, so they were welcomed with hospitality. And they waited till about noon when Joseph came into the house to eat. Apparently, it was his lunch break. They gave him the present that they had brought down from Jacob, and he inquired about their father's, or his father's, health, and they told him that Jacob was doing fine in Canaan. He was still healthy. He was still alive. Joseph greeted Benjamin, who he hadn't seen in so long, and he became emotional after that, and so he quickly had to leave the room so that no one saw him become emotional because he wasn't ready to reveal who he was yet. After he collected himself, he returned and food was served. Joseph ate by himself, and then the Egyptians ate by themselves, because the text tells us the Egyptians thought it was an abomination to eat with the Hebrews. So then the Hebrews ate by themselves, and they were seated in order of their age, from the oldest to the youngest. And this really shocked them because how could this be? Certainly with 11 brothers, it couldn't be a coincidence. And they had no idea that Joseph knew how old they were. So they were then served food from Joseph's table, but Benjamin received 5 times as much as the other brothers. We conclude chapter 43 with Joseph's brothers in his house, but they still don't know who he is. So now let's talk about an application, and this application will become clearer and clearer as we read the next couple chapters. People change over time. And I think we should be anxious to observe new maturity in people and to welcome them as their new mature self. It's easy to write a person off once you've had a bad experience with them, but over time, people grow, they mature, and they become more like Jesus. And one individual who we see this in a little bit in this chapter, but we're definitely going to see it in the next chapter, is Judah. If you remember back in Genesis 37, it was actually Judah who proposed that the brothers sell Joseph to the Ishmaelite caravan as they passed by. So it was Judah who said, hey, let's sell him as a slave. Let's not kill him. Let's at least get a little bit of money out of our brother so he's worth something to us in doing this. Then we don't have to hide the body. So we'll sell him to these Ishmaelites, right? It was Judah who proposed that. But in this chapter, what do we see? We see a 20-year or older Judah stepping up and going to his father and saying, I will take responsibility for Benjamin's safety. And if something happens to him, I will bear the guilt. Now, those are just words, but what we're going to see in the next chapter is Judah volunteering to become a slave for the rest of his life so that Benjamin can return to his father in Canaan. So this wasn't just words. This was something that he was actually willing to follow through with. In chapter 37, he sold his brother and broke his father's heart. In the next chapter, we're going to see him willing to sacrifice his own life to save his brother's life and to preserve his father's heart. So needless to say, Judah was a very different man. So when we think about our relationships with other people, let's hope and pray that people grow out of being their old sinful selves that they were in the past, and they grow up to a better version of themselves. And when that better version arrives, let's welcome it rather than holding their past against them forever. If Jesus believes in us that we can change, then we should believe that other people can change.